My name is Frank Harmon. I am 66 years old, and on a gray November morning, in the back office of a funeral home in Clarksville, Tennessee, my stepson slid a piece of paper across the table, tapped it twice with his finger, and told me I had 30 days to get off the land I had farmed for 31 years. He was smiling when he said it, not a sad smile, not a reluctant smile. The kind of smile a man wears when he has been waiting a long time for something and it has finally arrived. I looked at the paper. I looked at his face. And then I folded my hands on the table and said, "All right, Kyle. I understand." He blinked. He sat back. He had been ready for a fight, and I had just given him nothing to push against. I watched the confusion flicker across his face for just a moment before the smile came back. Wider this time, like he had won something he didn't even have to work for. He had no idea what I had spent the last 31 years quietly building. He had no idea what was already in motion. And he would not find out until it was far too late to do anything about it. But let me back up. Because to understand what happened that morning, you need to understand Carol. My wife Carol passed away 4 months before that meeting. Pancreatic cancer, 12 weeks from diagnosis to the end. She was 63 years old. She taught 3rd grade for 27 years at the same elementary school where she herself had once been a student. She made the best peach preserves in Dixon County, and she could name every bird that visited our back porch feeder by sight. She was the most decent human being I have ever known. I met Carol when we were both in our early 30s. She had a 5-year-old boy named Kyle from a marriage that had ended badly. I adopted him legally, 2 years after Carol and I married. I built him a treehouse in the big oak tree behind the barn. I drove him to every Little League practice for 4 years, even though he never once made contact with the ball. I sat in the front row at his high school graduation. I co-signed his first apartment lease. I paid off his first 2 credit card debts without saying a word about it to anyone, including Carol, because I did not want her to worry. I tell you all of this not to make myself sound noble. I tell you this because you need to understand that what Kyle did, he did not do to a stranger. He did it to the man who raised him. Carol's cancer moved fast. By the time the doctors caught it, there was nothing to do but manage the pain and say goodbye slowly. I slept on a cot in her hospital room for 6 of the last 8 weeks. I held her hand every night until she fell asleep, and I was there every morning when she opened her eyes. Kyle visited twice. The first time he stayed for 40 minutes. The second time he spent most of it on his phone in the hallway. After the funeral, I stayed at the farm alone. 812 acres of bottomland and ridge timber that my father-in-law had started buying up piece by piece, starting in 1959. When Carol and I married, the deed transferred into both our names. When her father passed, we inherited the remaining parcels. Over the years, I cleared fence lines, repaired the old tobacco barns, put in a pond, replanted the east ridge with white oak after the blight took the original timber. I poured every hour I had into that land. Carol and I had written our wills together 12 years ago, sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon with our lawyer, James Whitfield. The farm would pass to me in full if she went first. Simple, clear, witnessed, filed with the county. James had it in his records. I had a copy in my fireproof safe. So when I sat down in that back office at the funeral home for what I thought was a routine administrative meeting with the estate, and Kyle reached into his briefcase and placed a document on the table, I was not prepared for what I read. It was a new will, dated 7 weeks before Carol died. It left the farm, the equipment, the mineral rights, the timber contracts, and every account Carol had solely in her name. All of it, to Kyle Robert Harmon. I read it twice. My hands were steady. Internally, something had gone very quiet, the way a field goes quiet right before a bad storm. Carol's signature was at the bottom. It looked like her signature, but Carol had been on a morphine drip for the last 6 weeks of her life. She had days where she did not know what month it was. She told me once that she could see her mother standing in the corner of the room, and her mother had been dead for 19 years. She never mentioned a new will. Not once. Not in any of our conversations, not in any of the notes she left me, not in the letter she had James deliver to me the morning after she passed, The letter she had written months before, while she was still clear-headed, the letter where she told me to take care of the bluebird boxes on the fence line, because she had been monitoring a nesting pair for 3 years. I looked up from the document. Kyle was watching me with that smile. She made the change in September, he said. She wanted me to have the farm. She told me you'd probably fight it. Carol, who had never once said a negative word about me to another human soul in 31 years of marriage. She said that, I repeated. She did. He shrugged, not unkindly, but with the practiced ease of someone who has rehearsed the conversation. Look, Frank, you're not family, not blood. You were her husband. But the farm was always a Bellamy property. It should stay with her bloodline. That's what she wanted. That's what the document says. Not family. Not blood. I had coached his baseball team. I had driven 400 miles round trip to pick him up from a college he flunked out of and never told Carol why I had made that drive. I had been at the hospital the night his daughter was born. I had fixed his truck 3 times and never charged him a dime. I set the document back on the table. I pushed it gently back toward him. I'll need some time to look this over, I said. My voice was calm. I was surprised by how calm it was. Of course, he said. But 30 days, Frank. That's what's reasonable. I'm not trying to be cruel about this. I just need to get the property situation sorted. Property situation. My wife was 4 months in the ground and he was calling our home the property situation. 30 days, I said. That's fine. I drove home. I sat on the front porch for a long time watching the light move across the ridge. I could hear the creak from where I was sitting. I had listened to that creak from that porch for 3 decades. Then I went inside, opened the fireproof safe, and took out a business card that was so old the edges had gone soft. James Whitfield, attorney at law. I had a newer number for him in my phone, but I wanted that card in my hand. I had known James since 1987. He had drawn up the deed transfer when Carol and I first married. He had written our wills. He had been at our kitchen table for more Sunday dinners than I could count. I called him that evening. He picked up on the second ring. Frank, he said, I heard about the meeting today. I've been waiting for you to call. James was 74 years old and had been practicing law in Montgomery County for 46 years. He was not a loud man. He did not raise his voice. Not ever. Not in all the years I had known him. But when James Whitfield became angry, the temperature in a room dropped 10 degrees. I had seen it happen in a courtroom once, years ago, and I had never forgotten it. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a silence that lasted almost a full minute. The will he presented, James said finally, was not drawn up by my office. I know, I said. And Carol did not contact me at any point in the fall to discuss changes to her estate planning. I know. And you're telling me she was on palliative morphine for the last 6 weeks of her life. She was. Another silence. Frank, James said, and his voice had gone to that place I remembered from the courtroom. Do not move anything off that property. Do not let Kyle set foot on it. And I need you to do something that is going to be very hard. What's that? I said. I need you to let him think he's winning. For a little while. Can you do that? I looked out the window at the dark ridge line against the darker sky. Yes, I said. I can do that. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of my life. I stayed on the farm. I went about my days. I fed the cattle. I checked the fence line. I drove into town for groceries. I did not call Kyle. I did not contact anyone about the will. From the outside, I must have looked like a beaten man running out his last days on a property that was no longer his. Meanwhile, James was working in a direction Kyle had no way of seeing. The first thing James confirmed was what I had already suspected. The will was fraudulent. A handwriting expert from Nashville compared the signature to 12 authenticated samples of Carol's handwriting from the last 2 years of her life and delivered a 17-page report concluding that the signature had been produced by someone other than Carol Harmon. The pen pressure was wrong. The spacing between letters was wrong. Carol had a distinctive way of forming the letter C. A wide, confident loop she had written the same way for 60 years. The C on that document was tight and careful, the way a letter looks when someone is copying it slowly. But James had also found something else. Something that came from a direction I had not expected. Kyle had a girlfriend. Her name was Amber Pryor. She was 34 years old, and she worked as a paralegal at a small real estate law firm in Nashville. She had been with Kyle for 2 years, though I had only met her once, briefly, at Thanksgiving the year before Carol died. James's investigator found that Amber had accessed several online legal document preparation services in August, 2 months before the forged will was dated. She had also searched, from her personal computer, for the phrases, "Can a will be changed while on medication?" and "hospice patients signing legal documents," and "how to notarize a document without a notary present." She had the legal knowledge to understand what she was doing, and she had done it deliberately. But James came to me on a Thursday morning with a third piece of information, and that was the one that took the floor out from under me. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where Carol and I had written our wills 12 years ago, and he opened a file folder and set a single page in front of me. "My investigator pulled Kyle's financial records," James said. "Going back 14 months, I looked at the page. I did not immediately understand what I was seeing. Carol had a personal savings account," James said quietly, "in her name only. She opened it in 1994, before you were married, and she kept it separate, her private account. She used it for personal expenses, her classroom supplies, gifts, that sort of thing. I knew about the account. Carol was private about her finances in certain small ways, old habits from her first marriage, and I respected that. Over the 18 months before her death," James said, "$11,000 was withdrawn from that account in cash increments small enough to avoid automatic reporting. The withdrawals began 6 months before her diagnosis. They accelerated in the months after. And by man." I stared at the page. "Kyle was listed on the account as an authorized user," James said. "Carol added him in 2019. She told me at the time it was in case something happened to her and she needed him to manage expenses. She trusted him," I said. My voice sounded strange to me. "She did," James said. "And he used that trust to drain her account slowly, over a year and a half, while she was alive. While she was sitting at that table with you and watching birds from the back porch and trusting that the people around her were who she believed they were. I sat very still for a long time. That is a specific kind of grief. It is not the grief of loss. It is the grief of learning that someone you loved was hurt in a way you did not know about and cannot now fix. It sits in your chest like a stone, and it does not move." James gave me the time I needed. "What do we do?" I said finally. "We have already done most of it," James said. "I filed a petition yesterday to contest the will on the grounds of fraud and undue influence. I've been in contact with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office and a detective from the State Financial Crimes Unit. They are very interested in the account withdrawals, and I've requested a hearing for next Thursday." He paused. "I'd also like you to consider something. The farm is held jointly with right of survivorship under the deed we filed in 1993. Carol's signature was required to transfer that deed. She never signed a transfer, which means regardless of what that will says, the farm already belongs to you. It passed to you the moment she died. Automatically. By law." I looked at him. "Kyle doesn't know that," James said. "He's been focused on the will because he doesn't understand property law well enough to know that the will is irrelevant to the real estate. He thought the will gave him the farm. It doesn't. It never could have. He thought he had been very smart," I said. "He thought he was dealing with a grieving old farmer," James said. And that cold quality was back in his voice. Very clear, very quiet. He was not. I need to tell you about the Thursday of the hearing, because it did not go the way Kyle expected. Kyle arrived at the courthouse with a lawyer he had hired from Nashville, a man in a sharp suit who carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to winning on paperwork alone. Kyle was dressed well. He looked like a man who had prepared. He saw me sitting in the hallway with James, and I watched his jaw tighten slightly. The first crack in the performance. What Kyle did not know was that James had also notified the sheriff's department, and that 2 plainclothes detectives were sitting in the courtroom when the hearing began. The judge reviewed James's petition. She reviewed the handwriting report. She reviewed the financial records. She asked Kyle's lawyer several questions about the circumstances under which the will had been prepared and witnessed and notarized. Kyle's lawyer, to his credit, answered steadily. But the answers did not hold up well against the forensic evidence James had assembled. Midway through the morning session, one of the detectives entered the courtroom and handed a folded note to the bailiff. The bailiff passed it to the judge. The judge read it. She set it face down on her desk. At the lunch recess, Kyle was arrested in the courthouse parking lot. His lawyer was still inside gathering his files. Kyle was halfway to his car when the detectives reached him. I was watching from the top of the courthouse steps. I did not feel the satisfaction I had expected to feel. I felt tired, and I felt something else. Something older. The long, slow ache of a person who has loved someone who turned out to be capable of this. Amber Pryor was arrested at her workplace in Nashville the same afternoon. She was charged with fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The charges against Kyle included those same counts, plus financial elder abuse for the account withdrawals from Carol's savings during the final year of her life. I want to stop here and say something plainly, because this is the part I know people wonder about. Amber did not walk away from this. I have heard too many stories where the person who helped plan the crime disappears quietly, while the one who carried it out faces the consequences alone. That did not happen here. James made sure of it. The prosecutor made sure of it. The evidence against Amber was in some ways cleaner than the evidence against Kyle, because it was on her personal computer, in her professional email, in the document preparation records tied to her billing account. She had left a trail the way people do when they believe they are too clever to get caught. She was convicted 8 months later on 3 counts. She lost her paralegal certification. She will not work in a law office again. Kyle's trial took longer. His lawyer was good, and he fought hard, and I respect that in a professional sense, even while I have no feeling left for his client. The prosecution laid out the full picture. The account withdrawals, the forged will, the plan that had been in motion for at least 18 months before Carol died. They presented text messages between Kyle and Amber from the previous year, messages in which Kyle described the farm and its value to developers who had been eyeing the bottomland along the creek corridor for a mixed residential project, messages in which Amber walked him through the mechanics of what he would need to forge and file, and who would need to sign what. He was convicted on all counts. I was in the gallery when the verdict came in. I had driven myself. I sat in the second row and I listened to the jury foreperson read each count, and I thought about the treehouse in the oak tree behind the barn that I had built with my own hands when Kyle was 6 years old. The summer he had gone through a phase of being afraid of heights, and I had spent 3 Saturday afternoons convincing him, one rung at a time, that he was brave enough to climb. I thought about that a long time. I did not go back to the farm that night. I drove to my sister's house outside of Nashville, and I sat at her kitchen table until very late, and I let her make me dinner. And I did not talk very much. She understood. She had known Carol for 30 years. She understood without being told what this particular grief was. The following spring I went back to the ridge. The white oaks I had replanted after the blight had grown well. They were 15 years old now, tall and clean. And in the April light they had that new green color that only lasts about 2 weeks each year. I walked the fence line along the east pasture and checked the posts the way I had every spring. The creek was running high from the March rains. The bluebird boxes on the fence line had a nesting pair, just like Carol had noted in her journal. I stood there for a while watching the male bring dried grass to the box. I had called James 2 weeks before. "I want to do something with the timber rights," I said. He had asked me what I meant. I told him that a conservation land trust had approached me the previous fall about placing a permanent conservation easement on the ridge timber and the creek corridor. No development. The bottomland stays bottomland. The timber is managed sustainably. In exchange, I receive a substantial tax benefit, and more importantly, the land is protected in perpetuity, regardless of what happens to it after I'm gone. James was quiet for a moment. "That's going to be a significant financial decision, Frank." "I know," I said. "The developers are still interested. The creek corridor alone is worth considerably more than the easement benefit." "I know that too," I said. I've known for a long time." He waited. "The thing Kyle could never understand," I said, "is that I never wanted to sell. I never wanted the money. I wanted the land. I wanted the creek and the ridge and the bluebird boxes on the fence line. That's what Carol and I wanted. And neither of us ever needed anyone's permission to want that." I signed the conservation easement in March. I also called the principal of the elementary school where Carol had taught for 27 years. I told her I wanted to establish something in Carol's memory, a fund for classroom supplies, specifically for teachers at Title I schools in Montgomery County. Teachers who spent their own money on their students, the way Carol spent hers for nearly 3 decades. Every year, 10 teachers would receive a grant. Every year, Carol's name would be on the check. The principal cried a little on the phone. I told her Carol would have been embarrassed by that, and we both laughed. I am still on the farm. I still walk the fence line in the mornings. I still sit on the front porch and watch the light move across the ridge the way I have for 31 years. The creek still runs the same as it always did. There is something I have learned from all of this that I want to share with you, because I think about it on those mornings. The people who want to take things from you are almost always in a hurry. They are impatient. They cannot imagine that anyone they have dismissed as old or tired or broken might be quietly doing something they cannot see. They believe that speed is the same as advantage, that acting fast is the same as acting smart. But a fence line built in a hurry fails in the first hard winter. A tree planted in shallow soil blows down in the first real wind. Everything worth keeping requires patience. It requires time. It requires the willingness to do the work that no one is watching you do. Carol knew that. Her father knew it before her. I learned it from both of them. Slowly, over the course of a life that I would not trade for anything, not even the parts that broke me. If you are watching this and you have been dismissed by someone who thought they understood your limits better than you do, I want you to know something. The quiet ones are not quiet because they have nothing to say. The patient ones are not patient because they have given up. We are quiet because we are listening. We are patient because we understand something that the impatient ones will eventually learn at great cost. Everything comes to light. Every time. Thank you for listening. I would like to ask you something before you go. Have you ever had to protect something that meant more to you than money? A home? A piece of land? A memory? A name? Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better? Tell me your story in the comments below, and tell me where you're watching from. Your stories remind me that I am not sitting on this porch alone. And if you believe that patience and truth outlast greed and lies, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. There are more stories to tell, and I am not finished telling them.